Joining us now in our newsroom is Dr. Heather Fretwell, psychiatrist at Eskenazi Health, to talk about a very important topic that is going to be affecting some of us this season, seasonal affect disorder. So welcome, thanks for being here.
Thank you, it's definitely a pleasure.
And so seasonal affect disorder, can you explain what this is and who does it affect? Why does this happen?
So seasonal affective disorder is a condition that's probably been with us as old as time, but was only really described in the 1980s. And now 40 years later, it's a very well-established medical condition. It affects approximately 5% of Americans, but it differentiates by latitude. So it'll be about 1% in Florida and 9% in Alaska. In Indiana, we're at about that average 5% mark, which is more than it sounds like. That's about 1 out of 20 people.
Mm-hmm. And what are the factors that contribute to this?
So we think that it's caused mostly by changing in the exposure to natural light. As with much of the life on Earth, we're very responsive to light and sunlight durations. And we have found that when we have less light duration in our lives and a less light intensity in our lives, as happens in the fall and winter in Indiana, that our brains actually produce more melatonin and at different times than it usually does, which can lead to like a very sluggish, slow feeling. And that also the percentage of people that tends to be most susceptible to seasonal affective disorder actually also process serotonin differently during this time as well. In fact, they tend to express more levels of a protein that decreases the amount of serotonin that's available to signal from one brain cell to the next. Mm-hmm. And so this starts leading into the clinical depression.
So speaking of, just piggybacking on those sluggish feelings, signs and symptoms that we might be suffering from this.
So absolutely, starting out with fatigue to poor concentration, to that feeling of depression or sadness, or just not being able to enjoy your usual activities. A lot of people find themselves feeling more irritable and short with their friends and family members. And in fact, sometimes that's kind of one of the things that's reflected to people that helps them have that awareness, hey, something is going on that's not in my usual mode. It can progress to being very serious indeed. And some folks with seasonal affective disorder also have important life-threatening symptoms, including thoughts about death, dying, or how to carry out a suicide plan.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, some people have bad days, but this is a sort of prolonged condition that tends to get worse. Family members might start to notice these sort of dark thoughts that we have. When should we seek help? I mean, kind of makes sense when you start to, I mean, maybe people don't recognize it. I don't know. So you tell me, when should people seek help?
There's no bad time. Honestly, as soon as you start kind of worrying about yourself, as soon as you have a conversation, maybe with a friend or a loved one, hey, do I feel or do I seem to you like I'm not quite myself these days? Because often an external perspective can sense changes earlier than the person themselves can. There's no wrong time. There's no too early time to seek professional advice and help.
And ways to cope, natural versus medication.
So in terms of treatments for the seasonal affective disorder, actually one of the best studied is light therapy. So that's not necessarily a medication as required to treat this condition, although medication often does find benefits in this condition as well. Also, talk therapy, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy, has also been specifically studied for seasonal affective disorder. And this has also been proven to be beneficial.
Mm-hmm. So talking about medication and then both talk therapy and then, UV light, that was my question. I mean, there have been studies that have actually, you have proven or, showed significance that this is a great way to up our mood. But going back to medication and talk therapy, is this sort of a time frame that we do this, or should this be lasting?
So for a lot of folks with seasonal affective disorder, it's a treatment basically during the winter and into the early spring. And then as this naturalistically tends to resolve itself by late spring, one can often come off medicine if this is the only component of the major depression or mood disorder. Unfortunately, some folks have a recurrent major depression that's not seasonally linked, but then also may have a seasonal affective component on top of another episode. And in those cases, I would discuss with your doctor about perhaps remaining on medication year round.
Right.
But for folks specifically with the seasonal affective disorder, often the interventions can be time limited during the episodes of the disorder.
And you mentioned early spring when this starts to lift a little bit. Do we have a time frame in which this happens, this occurs, or is it different for everybody?
It's a little bit different for everyone, but if you think about our seasonal patterns, and the just past the middle of March is our spring equinox, and that really does mark when we're starting to have more daylight in our lives again, which again would reverse some of those physiologic changes I was describing earlier. So our melatonin production would normalize, and the production of that protein that artificially decreases our access to our own serotonin would also normalize with this increased light exposure.
Well, it's incredible what environmental change can do. And anything else you'd like to tell the people of Indiana who might be suffering, or maybe have a loved one that they suspect is suffering?
Please know that this is a very treatable condition. We have a lot of science and evidence of things that can be helpful. And also please know this is not a weakness, no more than asthma or insulin resistant diabetes or any other kind of medical condition. This is not somebody that one has because one is, weak or defective. This is one way that we are built, and one thing that we, as all humans are potentially vulnerable to. So please understand that and get whatever help you need to get through this trying time, as the 2020 season undoubtedly has extra special challenges compared to any other prior year of seasonal affective disorder.
Wow. Well, Dr. Fretwell, it was such a pleasure. Thank you for this insightful conversation, and it's going to help a lot of people. And we look forward to having you on again soon.